I stared at the subject line, Re-salary adjustment, urgent. My hands trembled. 6 months of overtime record-breaking KPIs, and this was the first time anyone mentioned my pay. Something felt wrong, deeply, deliberately wrong. You ever get that cold shiver, like the truth's been sitting quietly, waiting for you to notice? I clicked the email, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. I wasn't born into this, I built it. 15 years ago, I walked into my first day with nothing but a second-hand laptop, a used Ford, and more grit than most people twice my age. I didn't know anyone, I didn't have connections. What I had was work ethic, and that became my compass. I hit my numbers, then I broke records, I covered regions. Nobody wanted pulled, dying accounts out of the mud, trained new reps without being asked. Slowly the map started to change. Stores under my care grew, then multiplied. When our Midwest expansion launched, I was the one they trusted to lead it. Quietly, I became the backbone. Then came Thomas. The new VP, polished, charismatic. The kind of guy who shook your hand and made you feel like you mattered. "You're irreplaceable, Cassidy," he said after his first ride-along. "We'd fall apart without you." It meant something. I let it mean too much. Because after that, I stopped asking questions. I didn't negotiate when I took on double the team size. I didn't flinch when my name was missing from credit slides or leadership meetings. I told myself it was okay. As long as the work was good, people would see. When our biggest account almost fell apart, I stepped in, rewrote the deal terms myself, and saved the contract. I didn't even charge overtime. Just poured coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and stayed until it was done. I thought Thomas saw that. I thought we were building something, him at the top. Me, holding the line. I didn't realize I was building a kingdom that would never have my name on it. I mistook silence for respect, and I trusted a man who wore praise like perfume, just strong enough to make you ignore the smell underneath. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The end-of-quarter bonus didn't land in my account. That wasn't like them, but I gave it a few days. Payroll sometimes ran behind during holidays. No big deal. Then a week passed. Still nothing. I checked the new internal portal they'd launched, the one we had to use for all compensation reviews. Nothing under pending payouts. In fact, there was no mention of any bonus at all. Not for me. Not for the entire East Division. Like it had been erased. I emailed HR standard inquiry. Polite, precise. A day later, the status next to my ticket turned green. Resolved. No reply. No explanation. That was the first time my gut turned cold. I brushed it off, told myself it was just a system glitch that someone forgot to mark me down in the new rollout. But then another small crack appeared. My raise meeting was postponed. Twice no reschedule, no update. Still, I didn't panic. I had always played the long game. Loyalty, consistency, patience. That was how I built my reputation here. I'd earned the benefit of the doubt, hadn't I? Then one Monday, I opened the weekly agenda, expecting to see the MacArthur expansion project, my project, the one I'd led from inception, at the top of the docket. It wasn't there. Instead, a junior manager's name had replaced mine. No briefing. No explanation. I stared at the screen like it was a joke someone forgot to finish. That afternoon, I realized I was no longer on the strategy call. Invite list, a call I had been part of for 6 years. I searched my inbox 3 times just to be sure. Nothing. I walked down to Thomas's office. The door was open, but his eyes didn't lift from his screen. He smiled too quickly. "Cassidy? Hey, everything good?" I nodded too quickly. "Myself. Just noticed I wasn't on the agenda for the MacArthur review." He blinked. "Oh, must have been a mix-up. I'll look into it." He didn't. And I knew he wouldn't. That night I sat in the dark with my laptop staring at numbers that used to mean something. I wasn't out, not officially. But something had shifted. Conversations paused when I walked into rooms. Emails started arriving without the CC. I used to be on celebrations. I once led happened without me. It was like watching a storm roll in from the edge of a quiet field. You couldn't see it yet, but you could feel the pressure drop, and every instinct in my body whispered the same thing. Something's coming. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from giving everything and becoming invisible in the process. After the first signs of being sidelined, I could have pulled back, slowed down, watched from a distance, but I didn't. I kept moving because if I let my foot off the gas, I thought I might crash completely. Q1 was a nightmare. Half my leadership team left by January 1, moved states. One burned out and ghosted the company altogether. No replacements were sent. No interim support. Just Thomas leaning in one afternoon with that polished grin of his. Cassidy, if anyone can hold this together, it's you. You're the anchor. Don't forget that I didn't forget. I covered their territories. I managed their teams. I stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting sales protocols to fit the new restructuring plan. They never officially gave me. I showed up for everyone except myself. By March, my teams weren't just afloat, they were flying. We closed a $6.2 million contract with a retail chain we'd been chasing for years. I personally pitched the final numbers, negotiated the rollout, and trained the onboarding team from scratch. I led 2 entire sales teams, both understaffed, and helped them exceed 120% of their quarterly KPIs. Clients called me directly. Now, not my managers, me. And still, silence. No public recognition, no internal feature, not even a single company-wide email. I watched as junior staff got shout-outs for half the numbers I delivered. Meanwhile, I was logging 70-hour weeks and covering the work of 3 people. I went to Thomas again, politely. I asked whether he'd be sharing our Q1 wins in the next board update. He smiled. Already submitted it. You're in there, don't worry. You know I always see you, but I never saw the report, and my name never came up in the summary that circulated later. He kept me close, just close enough. There were always just enough breadcrumbs to keep me moving. Quick compliments. Casual check-ins. Can't do this without you slipped into hallway conversations like spare change. It worked until it didn't. By April, I was waking up with tightness in my chest and a weight behind my eyes that never left. My victories started to feel like someone else's, like I was ghostwriting a legacy that didn't have my name on it. I remember one Friday, sun finally out, after a brutal stretch of rain. I got a call from a field manager in Ohio. He said, "Congrats! I heard you built the new pitch deck for the national rollout." "It's genius!" I blinked. "What rollout?" He paused. "Oh, I thought you'd know. They said it was your work." "It was my work, but apparently not my project anymore." I hung up, sat still for almost 10 minutes, and let the quiet ring in my ears. The truth hit like a slow leak. They didn't want me gone. They wanted me drained. Useful but unseen, relentless, but replaceable. I wasn't being left behind. I was being used strategically, surgically. My every win was repackaged into someone else's slide deck. Every late night and perfect pitch melted into a shapeless cloud that floated above me, visible to everyone but me. And the worst part, I let it happen because I believed if I just worked a little harder, they'd have to see me again. But the spotlight I was chasing had already moved on, and all I had left was the burn. It was a Friday afternoon when the email came through, no subject line, just a string of forwarded replies from finance. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was a report I'd been mistakenly looped into. But my name was in bold. Final confirmation, Q1 Q2 bonus from Cassidy M has been fully reallocated to VP Incentive Pool, Thomas L. Division. Note: keep her under original contract to maintain cost efficiency through reorg. My stomach dropped. I read it again, then again. Words blurred my bonus, reallocated cost, efficiency. I wasn't confused. I was stunned, like a slow-moving wreck you see coming too late to stop. They hadn't forgotten, they hadn't miscalculated, they planned this. They moved my bonus silently, Deliberately, I scrolled through the rest of the chain dates, approvals, budget memos, a clean professional trail of theft dressed up as business optimization. No one questioned it. No one pushed back. They all just agreed. And Thomas, his initials were everywhere, not just approving the transfer, but recommending it. Leverage her output under legacy terms. Until Q4. She's consistent, won't make noise. That line hurt more than I care to admit. I sat back, completely still, the silence in the room pressed down on me like weight. I opened my files, pulled up the payroll history from the last 6 months. Then the performance dashboards. Team KPIs. My email receipts for every client save, every crisis patched. It was all there, undeniable proof of what I had delivered. Revenue spikes, territory expansions, contracts renewed. 2 teams I'd trained and led through chaos and still flat pay. No bonus. Nothing above the base. I pulled out the last email from HR where I asked about my delayed raise. We're reviewing all Q1 adjustments. It said I had trusted it, took it at face value. Now I saw it for what it was. A stall tactic. Page after page, it all unraveled. Projects reassigned right before launch. Credit diverted in internal recaps. Notes missing from shared folders. I hadn't been overlooked. I'd been strategically sidelined. I had always thought betrayal came in explosions, slammed doors, sudden firings. But this was betrayal by erosion, by design, by handshakes that never meant anything in the first place. I stared at Thomas's name highlighted in every spreadsheet, every forwarded approval. The man who once told me I was irreplaceable had been quietly replacing me, piece by piece, number by number. It wasn't just my bonus. It was my work, my effort, my name scrubbed clean. I closed the folder and leaned back, arms crossed tight across my chest, and then one thought broke through the numbness like a strike of lightning. How many others did he do this to? It wasn't just me. That intern who left after her client strategy was mysteriously absorbed by another team, that mid-level manager whose numbers never matched the bonuses they promised him. That woman from West Coast sales who disappeared after being restructured out just weeks after winning an industry award. Was Thomas carving his kingdom by stealing bricks from everyone else? I felt a chill crawl across my spine. The injustice wasn't just personal. It was systemic. And suddenly, the shock turned into something else entirely. Not rage, not yet, but something colder, sharper, quieter. The kind of silence that comes right before the storm. I didn't scream. I didn't storm down hallways or throw accusations across desks. That's what they expected. That's how they thought I'd lose. But I'd been underestimated before. And this time I was done, letting silence protect them. The Monday after I uncovered the bonus theft, I arrived early, before the office lights hummed on. I brought coffee, not for the caffeine, but for the ritual. Something to steady my hands while I started building my case. I began with the obvious payroll documents. KPI reports, project timelines. I organized everything into folders by month, highlighting discrepancies, color-coded spreadsheets, dates cross-referenced with client contracts and staff turnover. Then came the emails I pulled, archived threads where I'd raised questions, the polite follow-ups, the HR responses marked, resolved with no content. One by one, I painted the pattern of deflection and delay. Next came the recordings. You see, a few months back, during a one-on-one meeting, Thomas had leaned in close and said almost jokingly, "Cassidy, you don't need a raise. You've got purpose. That's worth more than money." I remember pressing record the moment he started rambling something about keeping the budget clean. I hadn't thought much of it then. Just another condescending compliment wrapped in charm. Now it was Exhibit A. I found 2 more voice memos, small interactions offhand, comments meetings where he'd skirt around my compensation while praising team cohesion. Each time his tone was casual. Too casual. The kind of arrogance that assumes no one's listening closely. But I contacted an old colleague from finance, someone who had left after a similar restructuring. She confirmed my suspicions. Thomas had a pattern: bonus pools shifted, titles changed, internal approvals rerouted. Quiet, clean, and nearly untraceable, unless someone knew where to look. Then I reached out to Elaine, former HR director turned employment attorney. She remembered my contract terms better than I did. After a quick review, her reply was short, surgical. "You've got cause. Document everything. Move carefully." I did 3 days later. I was ready. I sat at my desk, took a breath, and drafted a single email. No threats. No emotion, just facts, attached files. Chronology, evidence, subject, compensation, diversion. Fraudulent suppression of labor, action required to CEO, executive board, legal counsel. CC internal audit. External compliance, consultant. I didn't even sign it with a closing line, just my name, Cassidy M. I hit send. Exactly 43 minutes later, the building changed. Thomas was called into an unscheduled compliance review. His face, always so practiced, looked unfamiliar, now tight, pale, and oddly small under the fluorescent lights. He passed by my desk, didn't say a word. By noon, his calendar had been cleared. By 2:00 p.m., access to his executive tools was revoked. By 4:00 p.m., a full internal investigation had been launched. They froze everything: emails, payroll systems, internal databases. The same system they once used to erase me was now preserving every trace he'd left behind. But I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching him squirm, only clarity. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming power with precision. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought exhaustion would keep me compliant. But I'd learned something dangerous in those 6 months of erasure. Silence isn't peace. Silence is pressure. And pressure, when harnessed, becomes force. I didn't need to yell, I just needed the truth. And now the truth was louder than any voice in the room. I arrived early the next morning. Again? But this time I didn't bring coffee. I didn't need anything to steady my hands. The air in the building was different, tight, electric, like the static before a thunderstorm. Whispers were everywhere. People huddled around desks, hushed voices dropping phrases, like audit meeting, emergency review, and Thomas got pulled. But no one had the full picture. No one except me. At 9:03 a.m. An all-hands meeting was scheduled. At 9:06, every VP office door closed at once. And at 9:14, the CEO himself, Mark Loring, walked into the main conference room with a folder under one arm and an expression that looked carved from stone. The confrontation wasn't public, but the aftermath was. Everyone saw Thomas leave the room 30 minutes later, red-faced, jaw tight, flanked by 2 members of the legal team. He didn't return to his office. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He just walked. By the end of the day, his name had vanished from our system directory. Email access revoked. Company credit line frozen, and word spread fast. He was suspended indefinitely, pending full investigation, but it didn't stop with him. One by one, the dominoes fell. Directors who had signed off on the bonus diversions, senior managers who'd relocated project credit compliance staff who'd conveniently lost files. Half a dozen names flagged for review, some escorted out before the week was over. Then came the memo. A company-wide internal statement stamped with the CEO's initials. We acknowledge a breach of internal compensation ethics involving the suppression and misappropriation of employee earnings. Effective, immediately corrective action is underway. We would like to extend our sincerest apology to Cassidy M. for the violation of her labor rights and for the failure to recognize her leadership contributions. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open. For the first time in months, maybe years, people started talking. Really talking. I got emails from employees I barely knew. A woman in analytics who said her salary had been frozen for 2 years without explanation. A sales rep from Colorado who'd been reassigned just before closing a $15 million deal. his name missing from the win entirely. An assistant who'd been forced to ghostwrite project decks for a VP and then warned to stay in her lane. One by one, the voices came forward. Some were trembling, some were furious. All of them were finally unafraid. There was a shift in the office after that. Not overnight, not dramatic, but slow, steady, like a fog lifting. The tension that used to hover in meetings began to ease, eye contact returned. People stopped tiptoeing around their own worth. And Thomas's office, it stayed empty, stripped of plaques, plants, ego. Just a desk now. Nothing more. I stood at its doorway one evening, alone, watching the reflection of my own face in the dark window. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet ripple, a shift in gravity, the sudden realization that fear no longer holds the same weight. They used to call me irreplaceable. Then they tried to erase me. Now they had no choice but to acknowledge me. But more importantly, they had to acknowledge everyone they tried to silence. And as the dust settled, I knew something. Thomas never did. Power built on control always crumbles. But power rooted in truth, that's the kind that survives. When the dust finally settled, they offered me a promotion, a corner office, an upgraded title, a seat at the same table where Thomas once orchestrated his quiet empire. I smiled, I thanked them, and I said no. Because I wasn't interested in climbing broken ladders anymore. I didn't want a title built on the ruins of someone else's downfall. What I wanted was repair. I asked for something different. I asked to serve as a strategic advisor, specifically for fair labor policy and internal compensation systems, a role that wouldn't put me at the top, but deep inside the foundation, somewhere I could rebuild what had been quietly broken for years. They agreed. Maybe out of guilt, maybe because they had no one left who actually understood how the company worked, outside the boardroom walls. Either way, I got to work. The first thing I did was audit the entire KPI and bonus system. Not just mine, everyone's. I brought in a third-party compliance team and sat beside them for hours sorting through spreadsheets, timelines, incentive formulas, and cross-departmental approvals. The patterns were all there, underperformance disguised as policy reward systems rewritten mid-quarter. High-achieving employees cut out of bonuses by vague criteria and undocumented discretionary reviews. So I rewrote it. We created a transparent framework. Clear targets, quarterly evaluations, open access dashboards, no more backroom bonus pools, no more handshake deals between VPs and finance. But that wasn't enough. I proposed a new protection policy, one that made it illegal internally and contractually to divert delay or suppress compensation without formal notice, employee consent, and legal review. 3 steps. Simple, non-negotiable. I remember one board member asking, "Don't you think that's a bit extreme?" I replied, "Not as extreme as stealing $6 million in labor from your top performers without a paper trail." He didn't argue after that. The strangest part about all of it, I wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had once lived in my chest had cooled into something steadier, like a still lake after a storm. I wasn't interested in dragging Thomas's name through the mud. He had already buried himself. What mattered now was the people still here. The ones who stayed, the ones who whispered thank you when they passed my desk. The ones who started asking questions loudly, clearly for the first time in their careers. One afternoon, a junior associate knocked on my door. She was nervous, holding a performance report in her hand. "I didn't hit my numbers," she said, "but I managed to renew 3 long-term accounts that were about to walk." I told her to sit down. We talked through it. Her value wasn't in the numbers. It was in the trust she retained. That month, she got a bonus anyway. Because value isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's buried under layers of someone else's rules. And sometimes you just need someone to see it. That's what I became. Not a star. Not a nameplate on the corner office. but a safeguard. A quiet architect behind a system built to remember what we all forgot. People are not resources, loyalty is not free labor, and silence is not consent. I never thought I'd become a voice for anyone else. I was never the loudest in the room, never the type to post inspirational quotes or deliver rousing speeches. I believed in working hard, staying focused, and letting results speak for themselves. But somewhere along the way, I learned that silence doesn't always mean strength. Sometimes it's just what people expect from you when they benefit from your invisibility. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I started a blog. I called it Behind the Numbers, because that's where people like me had always lived, hidden behind reports, buried under charts, erased from credit lines. I began by sharing small reflections, lessons from my own experience. I didn't name names. I didn't rant. I told the truth, plainly, softly. To my surprise, it resonated. The inbox filled fast messages from engineers, admin assistants, senior leads, factory workers, people who'd carried departments without acknowledgement, people whose bonuses disappeared, people who were told they were like family, only to be left out of the will, so I turned it into a podcast. No music, no production team, just my voice, a mic, and a mission to tell the stories of those who kept companies running while staying in the background. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. And in a world addicted to noise, honesty stands out. The episodes started getting shared. HR groups picked them up. Former coworkers reached out, some with guilt, some with relief. And one day, I got an email from the organizers of a national HR conference. We'd like you to be our keynote speaker. Your story is redefining what ethical leadership looks like. I almost deleted it out of instinct. But I didn't. I accepted. Standing on that stage, I wasn't nervous, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't performing. I just stood in front of a room full of decision makers and told them what no policy manual ever will. That dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right. That talent shouldn't have to beg for protection. That silence isn't loyalty. It's survival. I shared my story, the bonus theft, the quiet isolation, the retaliation made with proof instead of noise. I talked about rebuilding systems from the inside. I talked about the people who wrote me after each podcast too afraid to speak up, until they knew they weren't alone. When I finished, the room was quiet. Not out of discomfort, out of respect. Afterward, someone approached me, a young HR manager with tears in her eyes. She said, "You're the first person I've seen stand up without burning it all down. You didn't scream, you didn't throw punches, you just corrected the balance." That's when the phrase began circling online. Professional rebellion with grace. I never set out to become a symbol. I didn't want a movement or a spotlight or to be called anything other than fair. But if telling the truth with clarity makes you a rebel, then I guess that's what I became. Now every week, I release a new story on Behind the Numbers, each one a stitch in a much larger tapestry. Stories of quiet strength of systems, challenged of names, finally being remembered. People send in their experiences. Some ask for advice. Some just need to say it out loud once to someone who won't look away, and I listen. Because I know what it's like to build an empire you're not allowed to own. I know what it's like to give everything and feel like nothing. I never wanted the spotlight. I just didn't want to be erased. In the end, they didn't break me. They just revealed who they really were and who I've become. I don't need applause. I just needed to be seen. They tried to silence me, but they only helped me speak louder with purpose. Now I'm using my voice for every person who's still working in the shadows. Have you ever been overlooked, underpaid, or erased? Drop your story in the comments. Share this with someone still waiting to be heard, and subscribe for more stories that finally say what no one else dares to. He slashed 40% of my salary, not because the company was struggling, but because he wanted me to quit quietly. No warning, no explanation. Just a number on a screen, smaller than it should have been, colder than I imagined. I wasn't fired, I was erased. Have you ever been pushed out quietly, not with a pink slip, but with a paycheck shrinking in silence? Stay with me, because what happened next wasn't just survival, it was strategy. I gave 12 years of my life to Everworth Financial, not out of blind loyalty, but because I believed in what we were building, something stable, something principled. Twice I pulled the company back from the edge of collapse. The first time it was a liquidity crisis. The second, a rogue investment strategy that could have sunk us. Both times I didn't ask for recognition. I just fixed the numbers and held the line. That was my way. No drama, no alliances, no office politics, just precision integrity and a refusal to cut corners even when it was easier to look away. But Harold didn't care about any of that. He was the new CEO, loud where I was quiet, flashy where I was focused, and deeply uncomfortable with anyone he couldn't control. Especially women who didn't smile on cue. From day one, I saw it in his eyes. The way he spoke over me in meetings, the way he praised less qualified men for repeating ideas I'd already outlined, the way he said team player but meant obedient. To him, I wasn't an asset. I was an obstacle, a relic from a system he wanted to reshape in his image. Sharper suits, shallower values. He didn't see 12 years of sacrifice. He saw a problem that needed to be handled. And he would come for me, not all at once, not with open aggression. No. Harold was smarter than that. He preferred slow cuts, quieter wounds, the kind that bleed on the inside where no one else can see. It started with a silence I couldn't quite name. At first, it was subtle, my quarterly bonus gone with no explanation. Budget tightening, they said, as if that hadn't stopped Harold from buying himself a new office espresso machine last week. I brushed it off. I'd been through worse. Then my name disappeared from the strategic meeting invite. A meeting I used to chair, I asked Harold's assistant. She blinked awkwardly. Maybe it was an oversight, she whispered, but we both knew it wasn't. And when the Lancaster project, the largest, most complex initiative of the quarter, was reassigned to Jared, I felt something tighten in my chest. Jared, the guy who once miscalculated a vendor bid by $80,000 and still thought an ROI report was a PowerPoint template. He listens. Harold said, that was it. He listens. But I didn't realize I was being groomed for execution until the boardroom lights dimmed and Harold clicked to the third slide, red letters bold, underlined critical error, budget overrun, 200,000 beneath it. A spreadsheet, familiar formatting. My initials. I sat up straighter, suddenly. Ice cold. This, Harold said, walking slowly around the table is why we're restructuring finance. He didn't look at me. Not once I tried to speak. My lips parted, but the room was already shifting, people glancing at each other, nodding as if they'd known all along. No prior warning. No request for explanation. No audit. Just condemnation by slideshow. The worst part wasn't the accusation. It was the theater of it all. Harold had orchestrated it perfectly. The timing. The visuals. The heavy silence he let hang in the air after each bullet point. It wasn't about money. It was about narrative, about control. And I wasn't being offered a seat at the table anymore. I was being served as the main course. I sat through the rest of the meeting with my hands folded, jaw locked. I didn't defend myself, not because I was guilty, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. Defending myself would have only fed the image they'd built, the emotional woman, the deflector, the difficult one. So I swallowed my fury and took notes instead. Every word Harold said, every nod from the board, every smirk. Jared tried to hide. They thought this was the end of me, but I've been here before. And if they'd known my past, they would have known you don't corner someone like me. You don't smear my name in public and expect me to break in private. No, what they did was light a fuse, and they mistook my silence for surrender. But I wasn't stepping back. I was stepping around them because the only thing more dangerous than a woman betrayed is a woman who's already made peace with burning everything down. They didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. After that boardroom ambush, after Harold flashed that slide with my name slashed in red like I was some failed experiment, everyone went quiet. No one said a word. No one pushed back. The same people who used to forward my emails with little thumbs-up emojis now avoided my gaze like I was contagious. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were shocked. Maybe they just needed time. But by the next day, the message was crystal clear. My assistant, Marla Sharp, loyal and unshakable, was temporarily reassigned to another department across the city. She didn't even get a chance to tell me goodbye. Another colleague, Joe, a soft-spoken data analyst, was suddenly terminated. His only crime: he'd once liked a LinkedIn post congratulating me for a speaking engagement. That was it. Just a simple click. Gone. Then it got personal. My paycheck didn't come through on the 1st. No explanation. HR kept looking into it. When I pressed, they told me to check with finance. Finance told me to check with HR. A loop, a trap. Then came the access cuts. One-by-one systems I used daily. Project dashboards, budget sheets. Client databases were locked. My keycard still opened the building, but not the server room, not the strategic planning suite, not even the floor where I once led the Innovation Council. I was being erased. The final blow came in the form of an anonymous email. Subject line, Matilda, not who you think she is. It was sent to nearly the entire office department, heads interns, even the new hire, who hadn't yet learned where the coffee machine was. Inside were screenshots from over a decade ago. Twisted half-truths from a long, settled personal dispute, photos taken out of context, and rumors so absurd I laughed before I realized no one else was laughing. No one asked me if any of it was true. No one checked in. They just stopped speaking to me. I wasn't being fired. I was being suffocated socially, professionally, and digitally, well enough that from the outside, it looked like I was just fading. And that was the plan. They wanted me to give up, to walk away, quietly ashamed, defeated. But they misunderstood me on a fundamental level. See, I'm not someone who plays to win. That implies a game with rules, with referees, with honor. This wasn't a game. It was a knife fight in the dark. And I don't fight to win. I fight to survive. I stopped seeking sympathy the moment I realized no one was coming to save me. I stopped trying to prove myself the moment I understood that proof didn't matter. Not in an environment where truth could be rewritten with a single click, a single whisper, a single redirected glance. So I went silent. Observing, gathering. If they wanted me invisible, I would become invisible on my own terms. Not weak, not gone, just unseen. Because in silence, people get sloppy. In shadows, they let things slip. And when a system is built to destroy you, sometimes the only way out is not to fight it head-on, but to learn its wiring, memorize its faults, and quietly, patiently set the whole damn thing to collapse from within. They thought they'd buried me. They didn't realize I was the soil, and I was already planting something far more dangerous than they could imagine. What came next wasn't revenge, it was resurrection. They thought I was cornered, but while they were busy burying me in shame and spreadsheets, I was sitting on something far more potent than reputation. I held the keys to the one thing no CEO, new or old, could afford to overlook: the welfare trust fund. Years ago, under a previous CEO, who still believed in people over politics, we established an internal benefits program, a quiet lifeline for long-term employees. Built into it was a series of protective clauses, trust documents, and emergency provisions meant to shelter staff from exactly the kind of internal abuse Harold was now deploying like second nature. And guess who was tasked with overseeing its integrity? Me. On paper, it was routine. I reviewed quarterly audits, managed disbursement schedules, and tracked compliance. But what Harold didn't realize, what no one bothered to ask, was that I also held something else: The original hard copy trust agreements, signed, dated, binding, and they weren't just legal fluff. These documents included a clause requiring unanimous consent from the fund's three largest shareholders before any structural changes could be made, including restructuring, including liquidation, including weaponizing policy against employees. Harold didn't know that because Harold never looked backward. He only bulldozed forward. But I'm not a bulldozer, I'm a vault. And inside that vault, I'd also been quietly storing every misstep, every reckless shortcut Harold had taken since he walked through Everworth's doors. It started small, inflated KPIs on quarterly reports. He'd tweak growth projections just enough to impress the board. Then came the shadow vendors, shell companies linked to personal acquaintances, submitting padded invoices for consulting no one could verify. Eventually, it escalated to something darker. Misappropriated insurance budgets pulled from staff healthcare reserves and funneled into executive perks. I kept the receipts, all of them encrypted logs, time-stamped backups, cross-referenced with internal approvals. Each file a quiet witness, because while Harold played chess in the spotlight, I was building the board beneath his feet. There's a particular kind of power in being overlooked, in being the one they underestimate. You move easier, you listen better. You see who they really are when they think you're no longer watching. I didn't run to HR, I didn't file complaints. I didn't raise alarms in the middle of the storm. I waited patiently, because I knew Harold wasn't just careless. He was arrogant, and arrogance always leaves fingerprints. He thought I'd disappear under the weight of silence and shame, but what he didn't know was this. He'd stepped into a house where I still held the foundation, and the moment he tried to tear it down, he'd be the one buried in the rubble. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing consequences, and soon, everything he built on lies would start to crack. From the inside out, they thought I was cornered, but while they were busy burying me in shame and spreadsheets, I was sitting on something far more potent than reputation. I held the keys to the one thing no CEO, new or old, could afford to overlook: the welfare trust fund. Years ago, under a previous CEO who still believed in people over politics, we established an internal benefits program, a quiet lifeline for long-term employees. Built into it was a series of protective clauses, trust documents, and emergency provisions meant to shelter staff from exactly the kind of internal abuse Harold was now deploying like second nature. And guess who was tasked with overseeing its integrity? Me. On paper, it was routine. I reviewed quarterly audits, managed disbursement schedules, and tracked compliance. But what Harold didn't realize, what no one bothered to ask, was that I also held something else. The original hard copy trust agreements. Signed, dated, binding. And they weren't just legal fluff. These documents included a clause requiring unanimous consent from the fund's three largest shareholders before any structural changes could be made, including restructuring, including liquidation, including weaponizing policy against employees. Harold didn't know that because Harold never looked backward. He only bulldozed forward. But I'm not a bulldozer, I'm a vault. And inside that vault, I'd also been quietly storing every misstep, every reckless shortcut Harold had taken since he walked through Everworth's doors. It started small. Inflated KPIs on quarterly reports. He'd tweak growth projections just enough to impress the board. Then came the shadow vendors, shell companies linked to personal acquaintances, submitting padded invoices for consulting no one could verify. Eventually, it escalated to something darker. Misappropriated insurance budgets pulled from staff healthcare reserves and funneled into executive perks. I kept the receipts, all of them encrypted logs, time-stamped backups, cross-referenced with internal approvals. Each file a quiet witness, because while Harold played chess in the spotlight, I was building the board beneath his feet. There's a particular kind of power in being overlooked, in being the one they underestimate. You move easier. You listen better. You see who they really are when they think you're no longer watching. I didn't run to HR. I didn't file complaints. I didn't raise alarms in the middle of the storm. I waited patiently, because I knew Harold wasn't just careless. He was arrogant, and arrogance always leaves fingerprints. He thought I'd disappear under the weight of silence and shame, but what he didn't know was this. He'd stepped into a house where I still held the foundation, and the moment he tried to tear it down, he'd be the one buried in the rubble. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing consequences, and soon everything he built on lies would start to crack, from the inside out. The first crack didn't come from me. It came from a junior accountant named Elise, barely a year into her role, quiet, meticulous, and completely invisible to people like Harold. She was reviewing cross-quarter expense reconciliations when she noticed something strange. A payroll ledger didn't align with the original welfare allocation. A six-figure discrepancy, buried beneath layers of renamed files and generic expense codes. She took a screenshot, then another. By noon, the image had made its way through Slack channels, private email threads, and even the company group chat, captioned only with, "This can't be real." Panic doesn't knock politely. It kicks down doors. By 3 p.m., the media got wind of it. A finance whistleblower blog posted an anonymous tip. Everworth Financial slashing benefits to fund executive bonuses. It caught fire. Retweets, screenshots. Internal DMs filled with wide eyes and side glances. The PR team scrambled for damage control. But it was too late because I hadn't just sent that report to the shareholders. I'd also prepared a sealed envelope hard copy and delivered it directly to the company's external compliance board. Signed, indexed, time-stamped. It wasn't a leak. It was a ledger, a full map of what Harold tried to bury. And now, it was time to speak. The board convened a special meeting. I was invited, though they didn't know what I planned to bring. I walked in with a USB drive and a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. No fear, just gravity. I stepped to the front, plugged in the drive, and up on the screen came his slide. The same one Harold used to accuse me of, a $200,000 error. But this time, I toggled document history. There it was. Original version. Balanced time-stamped edit. Adjusted by Harold's credentials. Red ink. Bold letters, fabricated numbers. The room fell still. I turned to the board. The error wasn't mine. It was manufactured, on purpose. Then I clicked to the next file, an audio recording. Harold's voice sharp, dismissive laughing. "Why are we wasting time on people who'll never make it past middle management? You think Glind matters? She's just a stubborn calculator with legs." Gasps. One executive lowered his head. Someone muttered, "Jesus." I didn't say a word about who sent me the clip, but I knew it was from Leo the intern. I once stayed late to help prep for his first presentation. The one who stuttered under pressure, but knew the numbers cold. I believed in him when Harold laughed at him. He'd repaid that belief in the most unexpected, powerful way with truth. I looked around the room. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I simply said, I don't need to shout. I just wait for the truth to speak. At the right moment, that moment had come, and it echoed through the walls, the inboxes, the headlines. Harold didn't speak, couldn't. For the first time, his voice was no longer the loudest in the room. The truth was. And I had let it roar. By the time the boardroom doors closed behind me, Harold's reign was already unraveling. There was no dramatic exit, no final outburst, just silence and a badge that no longer worked. Within hours, his company access was revoked. Executive accounts frozen. His personal assistant escorted out with 2 boxes and no answers. It was all done swiftly, almost clinically. The official statement read, Harold Weissman is hereby suspended from all executive responsibilities, pending independent investigation. But the truth moved faster than any memo. A third-party audit team arrived the next morning. No ties to the board. No loyalty to Harold. Just seasoned investigators who had seen this kind of rot before and knew exactly where to dig. And dig they did. What started with doctored KPIs quickly exploded into a full-blown crisis of integrity. Herald had built a castle of lies, falsified growth data to appease investors, funneled wellness and diversity funds into luxury executive offsites, silenced internal whistleblowers with carefully worded NDAs. Dozens of resignations framed as performance-based terminations were found to be retaliatory, pushed through without HR protocol, often under veiled threats. For days, the halls of Everworth felt like the aftermath of a controlled demolition. Quiet ashen. People whispering by elevators, watching their screens with wide eyes. And me, I said nothing. I didn't need to, because the system Harold weaponized against me, against all of us, was now turning on him line by line, file by file. When the dust began to settle, the board requested a private meeting. They looked tired, humbled. For the first time, they saw not just what had happened, but who had survived it. They offered me the title CEO. I didn't hesitate. I declined. Not because I wasn't qualified, but because I didn't want his chair. I had no interest in inheriting the legacy of a man who used power to erase people. What I wanted was different. I'll take the role of senior strategic advisor. I told them under one condition. They waited. I will not sign a single strategic document unless there's a public written legally binding commitment to restore every benefit title and future Harold stole. This includes retroactive compensation, reinstatement options, and full protection for every employee affected under his tenure. They didn't blink, they just nodded. Not out of goodwill, but because they had no other choice. You see, power doesn't always sit in the biggest chair. Sometimes it stands behind the person holding the receipts. The person who knows how the wiring runs. The person who was buried but came back with the blueprint. I didn't ask for applause. I didn't gloat. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a contract rewritten in the very room where you were once erased. I never wanted to destroy Harold. I wanted to restore balance, quietly, precisely, permanently, and that's exactly what I did. The same gears they used to grind me down, I now turn with my own hands. It didn't take long for the walls to come crashing down around Harold. Within 48 hours of the independent audit's findings, the board moved swiftly. A unanimous vote. No negotiations, no farewell speeches. Harold was fired publicly, decisively. The industry watchdogs followed suit, revoking his license and issuing a 5-year ban from working in finance. No headlines softened the blow. Harold Myers ousted a mimid. Ethics scandal. Manipulation, misconduct, and a fall from power. The man who once strutted through the office like a monarch now faced hearings, frozen assets, and the chilling silence of a community that once feared him. But the collapse of a tyrant wasn't the whole story. The company, our company, began to breathe again. Leadership opened a bridge program, inviting back those who had been unfairly pushed out. I watched familiar faces reappear, older perhaps, but carrying that quiet fire. Only those who've been wronged carry, veterans from operations compliance and strategy. Many of them who had once stood silently in Harold's shadow returned to finish the work they started years ago. There was no grand reunion, just nods, tight handshakes. A shared sense of, we're here now, and that's what matters. The culture shifted. Meetings became transparent. Decision-making was collective again. Salaries were reviewed. Titles were corrected. And somewhere between Q2 and Q3, the company posted its first net profit since Harold's restructuring began. But me, I stayed 3 more months. Not out of loyalty, not even out of duty. I stayed because I needed to see if change was real or just another costume. And once I was certain the ship would hold, I stepped away. I didn't ask for a farewell party. Didn't write a LinkedIn post. I packed my things into one small box, a photo of my old team, a stapler for my first promotion, and the little jade elephant that had sat on my desk since my intern days. No one tried to stop me. No one begged me to reconsider. They knew and I knew that I had done what I came back to do. Justice in my world never comes loudly. It shows up in returned names on project files, in restored pension plans, in HR emails that apologize not as a formality, but with sincerity. It arrives like a quiet sunrise after years of fog. Back at home, I placed the box in the corner of my bookshelf, sat down, breathed in something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The next morning, I returned to my usual coffee shop, same table, same corner. But this time, no spreadsheets, no crisis calls, just a blank notebook and silence. That's when the barista walked over with something I didn't order. A small white envelope. No name, no stamp, no handwriting on the outside. I opened it, expecting maybe a receipt or a business card. Inside was a single folded note, 4 words handwritten in neat block letters. You gave us back dignity. That was it. No signature, no clue who it came from. But I didn't need to know because I felt it. In my chest, in my bones, in every quiet decision I made when it would have been easier to scream or fight or run. Dignity isn't something you can demand. It's something you protect for others, for yourselves. And when you do it right, someone somewhere always remembers. Some people retaliate with rage. I chose to respond with precision, correcting every number they once twisted against me, and if there's one thing I learned, never corner someone when you don't know what they're quietly holding. Have you ever been underestimated? Erased or pushed aside by someone who thought you'd just quietly disappear? Drop your story below, because sometimes the ones they dismiss are the ones who hold the real power all along. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about resilience, quiet victories, and the kind of justice that speaks louder without shouting.